Good afternoon to everybody. Today I am going to discuss about the first chapter of Unit 4, that is British economic policies in India 1757 to 1857, commercial policy, drain of wealth, development of means of transport and communication, and revenue policy. This is one of the most important chapter because by reading this chapter we can know that how the Britishers they have exploited our economic resources, and that led to the poverty of the Indians, and we will know about the development of means of communication and transport system, how they developed by the Britishers, and we also know about the drain of wealth, which was one of the most important factor for the existing poverty of India, and the problems which arise. Now we are facing every problem due to the poverty. And the revenue policy, the permanent land settlement system, Rayatwari system and Mahalwari system. These three revenue systems were introduced by the Britishers in order to collect revenues for the better administration system of the Britishers or British colonial government. During the year 1757, after the Battle of Plassey, the Britishers they occupied Bengal, and after their occupancy they introduced new administrative policies and they exploited the economic resources of India. So, I am going to discuss about this chapter. So, what was the economic condition of India during 17th century? The Britishers they came into India as traders. The East India Company was a trading company which came to India in 1600 BC, and it established trade with Indian people. So, during 17th century India was ahead of the leading European mercantile nations. The European countries were striving to set up commercial contact with India and establish their supremacy in India's foreign trade. India was the largest producer of industrial goods in the world. The European countries like Portugal, France, Spain, Dutch and the Britishers, the English merchants, they competed with each other in order to establish trade with India. As India was one of the most prosperous and economically affluent country during that period, they wanted to establish trade and commerce activities with the Indian people. And the Britishers they defeated all other European powers like France and Dutch, then Danes, the Portuguese people, and they established their sway over India and they established their administration in India. So, India's principal exports consisted of fine cotton and silk fabrics, spices, indigo, sugar, drugs, precious stones and diverse works of art. India was very famous for its cotton and silk fabrics. The English merchants they took away the Indian clothes and Indian spices, etc., and they bought these articles in cheap rate and they sold those items in European countries with high rates. And the European countries they wanted to establish the trade relationship with Indians in order to achieve or in order to get these materials like silk and cotton fabrics, etc. So, imports were few and consequently the balance of trade was in her favor. The European merchants paid for Indian goods in precious metals, gold and silver flowed into the country and added to her wealth. India became a sink of precious metals. During the 17th century period, India had accumulated a lot of metal in the form of gold and silver, as the Europeans, they had not much more goods which should be sale in India. So, they provided in the form of precious metals. Then economic condition of India was very prosperous during that period. In world trade, India was the respiratory organ for the circulation and distribution of money and commodities of the world. It was the sea wherein all the rivers of trade and industry flowed and thus enriched its inhabitants. The administrative policy of the company underwent frequent changes during the long period between 1757 to 1857. After the Battle of Plassey and Boxer, the Britishers, they established their administrative system. They introduced dual government in Bengal, where power and responsibility was deferred, and the Britishers, they established one type of rule where the officials were corrupt and the power was severed from the responsibility. Then the policy of the company that underwent frequent changes during the long period between 1757 to 1857, which led to the great war of 1857. The main objects of the company were to increase the company's profit, enhance the profitability of its Indian possessions to Britain, and maintain and strengthen the British hold over India. The main emphasis in this respect was placed on the maintenance of law and order, so that trade with India and exploitation of its resources could be carried on without disturbance. So, the British East India Company, it wanted to extend its territory. It followed the policy of war and conquest, and they wanted to subjugate the petty states during that period, and they wanted to exploit the economic resources, the mineral resources for their own benefit, and they wanted to establish trade, in which they introduced the free trade policy that was very profitable for them. From 1600 to 1757, the East India Company's role in India was that of a trading corporation, which brought goods or precious metals into India and exchanged them for Indian goods like textiles and spices, which it sold abroad. Its profits came primarily from the sale of Indian goods abroad. It opened new markets for Indian goods in Britain and other countries. It increased the export of Indian manufacturers and encouraged their production. So, English East India Company took away the Indian goods to other European countries and sold those goods in high rates. So, they profited with the Indian goods, but they bought those things in very cheap rate, so that they encouraged the manufacturers of India to produce more and more goods, so that they can establish their trade with other European countries. So, the British manufacturers were jealous of popularity that Indian textiles enjoyed in Britain. The Indian manufacturers, they were become very popular in all over the world due to the best quality of cotton, best quality of silk fabrics, spices. The British manufacturers, they were jealous of the popularity that Indian textiles enjoyed in Britain. The author of the famous novel Robinson Crusoe complained that Indian cloth had crept into our houses, our closets and bed chambers, cottons, cushions, chairs, and at last beds themselves were nothing but calicos or India stuffs. So, the British manufacturers, they became jealous towards Indian manufacturers, and they faced several difficulties in extending their trade, and they wanted to create one type of feeling of opposition against the Indian manufacturers. The British manufacturers put pressure on their government to restrict and prohibit the sale of Indian goods in England. By 1720, laws had been passed forbidding the wear or use of printed or dyed cotton cloth. In 1760, a lady had to pay a fine for possessing an imported handkerchief. So, in Great Britain or in England, the manufacturers, they put pressure on their government that Indian trade articles that should not be used by the Britishers. Instead, they wanted to use the woolen cloth instead of using the cotton cloth. So, once a lady used a handkerchief which was of Indian material, and so that she had to pay a fine. So, other European countries except Holland also either prohibited the import of Indian cloth or imposed heavy duties. In spite of these laws, however, Indian silk and cotton textiles still held their own in foreign markets until the middle of the 18th century, when the English textile industry began to develop on the basis of new and advanced technology. So, other European countries, they also imposed heavy taxes when the Indian goods entered into their market, which was more than 3 times more than the actual rate of those materials. In spite of these laws, the Indian silk and cotton, that was very popular among the Europeans. Until the middle of the 18th century, when the English textile industry began to develop on the basis of new and advanced technology, the Indian materials were very popular in Europe. So, after the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the pattern of the company's commercial relation with India underwent a qualitative change. Now, the company, East India Company, it became the ruler of Bengal, but before 1757 it was merely a trading company. East India Company was merely a trading company, but after subjugating Bengal, it established its own rule and became the ruler of Bengal. So, it established its political control to acquire monopolistic control over Indian trade and production and push its Indian trade. It utilized the revenues of Bengal to finance its export of Indian goods. When the English East India Company became the ruler of Indian trade, that is of Bengal, it wanted to establish its monopoly. The Bengal should not establish its trade relationship with any other foreign countries like France, Portugal or Dutch, etc. The company used its political power to dictate terms to the weavers of Bengal, who were forced to sell their products at a cheaper and a dictated price, even at a loss. Their labor was no longer free. So, many of them were compelled to work for the company for low wages and forbidden to work for Indian merchants. So, the Indian merchants, they were forced to work for the foreign company, that is English East India Company. The company eliminated its rival traders, both Indian and foreign, and prevented them from offering higher wages or prices to the Bengal handicraftsmen. Then the servants of the company monopolized the sale of raw cotton and made the Bengal weaver pay exorbitant prices for it. Thus, the weaver lost both ways, as a buyer as well as a seller. The Indian textiles had to pay heavy duties on entering England, because it was taxed heavily by the British government, and the British government was determined to protect its rising machine industry, whose products still not compete the cheaper and better Indian goods. When the Indian textiles and Indian trading materials they reached the European market, they were taxed heavily, and the poor traders they were unable to compete with the Britishers, and so the business of the trading facility, which was previously enjoyed by the Indian traders, now was hampered. Now it was hampered. The Industrial Revolution in Britain completely transformed Britain's economy and its economic relation with India. The Industrial Revolution and Britain economy. When the Industrial Revolution started in England, England became one of the prosperous country in the world. The British industry developed and expanded rapidly on the basis of modern machines, the factory system and capitalism. This development was aided by several factors. So, when the Industrial Revolution started in England, there were the emergence of two classes in England. One is the class who have much more wealth and who established factories, and the other section were the laborers or the poor working section of the society. The British capitalism that emerged after the Industrial Revolution, and they established factories, and there was the development of British economy due to the Industrial Revolution, due to the invention of new machineries, and there was the growth of towns in England, and large number of people they worked in the factories as laborers, and the people were also exploited. There was the emergence of child labor system. Even 5 to 6 year children were working in the factories, and 15 to 16 hours a day the people had to work in the factories, especially the laborers. So, the Britain captured and monopolized many foreign markets by means of war and colonialism. English East India Company, it established established colonies in India, and the Britishers they established company in Asia, Africa and in different parts of the world. The main purpose of the establishment of the company was to exploit the natural resources, the mineral resources of other countries in order to feed their industries, and they should feed the laborers, as there was less production of food grains in England, as much more people were engaged in the industrial activities, they were working as laborers. There was the development of slums, and there was less production of food grains, agricultural products. So, that the Britishers they looted or they exploited the economic sources of their colonies. The Britain captured and monopolized many foreign markets by means of war and colonialism. The Britishers they followed the policy of war and conquest in order to establish their colonies in different parts of the world. So, these export markets enabled Britain to become more prosperous. Its export industries to expand production rapidly, utilizing the latest techniques in production and organization. The cotton textile industry served as the main vehicle of the industrial revolution in Britain. The colonies and underdeveloped countries exported agricultural and mineral raw materials to Britain, and Britain sold them to its manufacturers. So, in English East India Company, it exploited the economy of its colonies. India was one of the colony of the Britishers. So, they took away the agricultural products and minerals, the raw cotton, raw silk, jute, and different types of food grains, indigo, tea. These food grains and these agricultural products, they were taken away by the Britishers in order to feed their industries and their laborers. So, immense wealth drawn from Africa, Asia, the West Indies, Latin America and India by the East India Company and its servants, which played an important role in financing industrial expansion. Then the population of Britain increased rapidly after 1740 and it doubled in 50 years after 1780, which met the need of the growing industries for more and cheaper labor. As there was industrial revolution in England, it was necessary to have more laborers in different to be engaged in different industries. So, during that period, the population of Britain that increased rapidly. So, more and more laborers, they were engaged in the industries, which helped more production in the industries as more manpower is required to work in the industries or factories. That helped a lot for the development of production of industries, industrial materials. So, Britain had a government which was under the influence of commercial and manufacturing interests and which fought for markets and colonies. So, British government, it also wanted to establish more and more colonies in different parts of the world, so that they would get more and more raw materials in order to feed their industries, and they can use the mineral resources which is necessary for their development of economy, and they wanted to establish market in different colonies where their industrial products can be sold. So, they wanted the market for their industrial products and they wanted raw materials from the colonies. So, the British government that was also supporting the establishment of colonies and more and more nations to be subjugated by the Britishers. So, the demands for increased production were met by developments in technology. Britain's rising industry could base itself on the inventions of Hargreaves, Watt, Crompton, Cartwright and many others. So, when the British industrial products, they were in great demand in different parts of the country, they wanted to develop their industrial products more and more by using technology. So, Britain's rising industry could base itself on the inventions of James Hargreaves, then Crompton, Cartwright and many others during that period. it was not these inventions which produced the industrial revolution, rather it was the desire of the manufacturers to increase their production rapidly for the expanding markets, and their capacity to invest the needed capital, which led them to utilize the existing technology and to call forth new inventions. So, due to their urge for more and more production, they invented new machines, new technology, and they introduced several new machines, new instruments, scientific instruments to be used for the much more production in the industry. That led to the development of economy of England. Then the Industrial Revolution transformed the British society and led to rapid economic development. So, this Industrial Revolution was the main cause for the development of England. Now, the people, they are living a very modern life with scientific and technological inventions due to the urge for the more and more production of, for the more better life or luxurious life due to this Industrial Revolution. Then the stages of British colonialism. In 1757, the Battle of Plassey laid the foundation of British colonialism in India. When the East India Company established its hold over Bengal, the British imperialist rule can be divided into 3 phases. So, after the Battle of Plassey, when the English East India Company, they established their rule over Bengal, colonialism started there, or they established their colony in India, and they wanted to establish the imperialist rule, in which their main aim was to exploit the mineral resources of India and oppress the uncivilized people of what they have viewed about India, and they wanted to establish a better administrative system in which they should have profit. So, they established the imperialist rule, which can be divided into 3 types, 3 phases, that is mercantile phase. 1757 to 1813 was the period of mercantile phase. Then the second period was industrial capitalism phase or free trade 1813 to 1857. Then the financial capitalism phase 1860 onwards. The East India Company monopolized its trade in India by using political power. It forced the countries who were under the rule of English East India Company, they should not establish any trade relationship with the other companies like French company or Dutch company, trading companies. And the main feature of this phase was buying cheap Indian goods and selling it at higher prices in different European countries. So, during the first phase, they monopolized the trade, they bought the Indian goods in cheaper rate, and they wanted to sell those articles in higher prices in different European countries, so that they could get profit and they developed their economy. Then the second point is, or the second phase is the Industrial Revolution took place in England, which transformed British economy. There was the better economic condition of England due to the Industrial Revolution. India became the chief exporter of raw materials to Britain and the chief importer of British manufactured goods. the Britishers, they took away the raw materials from India and they prepared the manufactured products in their industries. The British manufactured goods were supplied to the Indians and they were sold in the markets of India. Then the third phase is the financial capitalism. In this phase, the British officials, they wanted to bring change in the transport and communication system of India. They introduced railways, then roads, post and telegraph services to benefit their own political and investments. Public debt on India increased and it drained out the wealth of India. The British, they introduced railways for their own convenience. They wanted to reach the places where the people raised their voice against the Britishers by using those railways or by using the road which were introduced by the Britishers. And they used the postal system so that they could communicate with each other very easily and they can reach the unreached places of India to exploit the economical resources very easily by using railways and roads. And they wanted to be benefited more and more. With these investments, public debt on India increased. Then free trade policy of Government of India. The Government of India followed a policy of free trade or unrestricted entry of British goods. The Indian handicrafts, they were exposed to the fierce and unequal competition of the machine made products of Britain and faced extinction. The Government of India that followed a policy of free trade or unrestricted entry of British goods. When the Britishers, they imported their industrial manufactured goods to the Indian market, they had to pay very less tax or nominal taxes, and when Indian goods they entered the British market, they are taxed heavily. So, the Indians, they could not compete with the British manufactured goods which are easily available in the market. So, there was a fall of export of Indian trading materials, Indian trade that suffered a lot due to the free trade policy and heavy taxation policy faced by the Indian traders in the European markets. Then India had to admit British goods free or at nominal tariff rates. The Government of India also tried to increase the number of purchasers of British goods by following the policy of conquest. So, the British government, they followed the policy of war and conquest in order to get more and more areas to be subjugated under their rule. They wanted to create more and more markets, so that they could sell their industrial products to more people. Indian handmade goods were unable to compete against the much cheaper products of British mills, which had been rapidly improving their productive capacity by using inventions and a wider use of steam power. So, Indians, they were unable to compete with the machine made materials. As the people of India, they were following the cottage industries for their development, they were not able to compete with the foreign made products. Then the Indian industries were not protected by the foreign rulers and the foreign goods were given the free entry. So, foreign imports rose rapidly. As the Indian government, they are unable to save the cottage industries which faced much more difficulties for the more and more production during that period, and the Indian markets were flooded with the British manufactured or industrial manufactured products. So, the government also took no step for the development of cottage industries in India, and the foreign imports that rose rapidly, which led to the poverty of the Indian traders, Indian artisans, that led to the underdevelopment of Indian economy. The free trade imposed on India was one sided. The doors of India, they were thrown wide open to foreign goods, and Indian products were subjected to heavy import duties on entry into Britain. The free trade imposed on India was one sided, and the doors of India were thrown wide open to foreign goods, and Indian products were subjected to heavy import duties or entry into Britain. For example, in 1824, a duty of 67.5% was levied on Indian calicoes, and a duty of 37.5% on Indian muslins. So, Indian sugar had to pay on entry into Britain a duty that was over 3 times its cost price. So, the Indian traders, they did not want to trade in foreign countries, because they had to face a lot of problem, and they had to give in the taxes which was 400 times more than the actual rate in some cases, as described by some historians. So, as a result of prohibit import duties and development of machine industries, Indian exports to foreign countries fell rapidly. So, instead of exporting manufactures, India was forced to export raw materials, which British industries needed urgently, or plantation products like indigo and tea, or food grains which are in short supply in Britain. So, India was forced to export the raw materials, but in the remote past, India was famous for exporting the products which made India one of the most prosperous country, or finished products, but now it was forced to export raw materials, raw jute, raw silk, etc. And the British industries urgently needed the raw materials due to the industrial revolution and establishment of new factories, new industries in England. They wanted raw materials, and India supplied those raw materials. Now, India was converted as a raw material supplier to the European countries, or plantation products like indigo and tea, or food grains which are in short supply in Britain. The British also promoted the sale of Indian opium in China, even though the Chinese put a ban on it because of its poisonous and other harmful effects. The trade yielded large profits to British merchants, and fat revenues to the company controlled administration of India. By the end of 19th century, Indian exports consisted of raw cotton, raw jute, silk, oil seeds, wheat, hides and skins, indigo and tea. So, the British, they promoted the sale of Indian opium. Although China had banned opium due to its harmful effects, but the Britishers, they were getting benefited by supplying or by trading the opium in China. So, the commercial policy of the East India Company after 1813 was guided by the needs of British industry. Its main aim was to transform India into a consumer of British manufacturers and a supplier of raw materials. So, the commercial policy, of which we have already discussed about the commercial policy of East India Company after 1813, it was guided by the needs of British industry. So, first of all, they established free trade with the Indian people in India, and they were benefited by trading with the Indian people. Then they introduced another policy, commercial policy, that was the policy in which they supplied the raw materials from India in order to feed their industries, and then they used India as a market for their finished products, for industrial products. So, they exploited the Indian economical source and mineral sources for their own benefit. Then we will discuss about the drain of wealth. Then what is the meaning and nature of drain of wealth? During the 200 years of British rule, India had to pay a very heavy price for what she got from England. India paid heavily by giving the taxes. Although the Britishers, they had civilized India, they developed the social condition of India, the economic life, they also introduced reforms in India. There was the all round development of India due to the Britishers. We know about our past due to the foreigners, because the Britishers, they took steps for the development of historical writings to know about our ancient glory and past by the foreigners or by the British historians. The excavation and exploration and the ASI department, which is established in India to know about our history, was possible due to the British rule. Then there is the development of economic condition of India due to the Britishers, as they developed trade and commerce activities, and due to the establishment of new industries. And in the society, if we will consider about our society, the socio-religious reform movement, by introducing the socio-religious reform movement, they also changed the life pattern of the Indians, and they imbibed the new ideas, new thinkings among the Indians, and they introduced liberty, equality, fraternity. All these things are the positive side of British rule. The Britishers, they changed our social life, they modernized us, but we have to pay a heavy price for it, as the British siphoning system adopted to take away India's resources and wealth has come to be appropriately called by economists like R.C. Datta, Dadabhai and others the economic drain. The Britishers, they took away India's resources and wealth. They took away the wealth of India in different forms, in the form of presents, in the form of remuneration, in the form of gifts. So, they took away the wealth of India in different forms. That was going one way. They took away the wealth of India, but there was not coming anything from their side to India. The theory of drain was developed by the Indian nationalist thinkers, mainly with a view to analyze one of the main causes of poverty in India. The poverty of India was due to the drain of wealth. So, the drain referred to the unrequited surplus of exports over imports that was transferred to England. The drain was typically a phenomenon of the colonial rule. The drain theory, it was developed by the Indian nationalist thinkers. They wanted to popularize that the British rule is the main cause behind the poverty of India. As they are exploiting the people, they are exploiting the mineral resources, economic resources, they oppressed the people, and the peasant section, they became very poor, and they introduced the revenue policies like permanent land settlement system, they introduced jamindari, rayatwari, mahalwari system in order to extract more and more money from the people of India. The transfer of resources, that is unrequited exports from India to England, either without getting anything in return or getting only a disproportionately small part of such a transfer of resources, has come to be described as the drain on India's resources. So, the transfer of resources, that is unrequited exports from India to England without getting anything in return. So, Indians were getting nothing in return, but they were only giving and giving, they are not getting anything. So, so that it is called as the drain of wealth. The person to draw pointed attention to this drain of resources from India to England was Dadabhai Naoroji in his book Poverty and On British Rule in India in 1871. So, Dadabhai Naoroji popularized the drain of wealth theory, and he made an attempt to explain the causes of drain, to measure the amount of drain flowing from India to England, and to trace the consequences of such drain. He tried to prove that the prevailing mass poverty in India was the direct consequences for the drain of resources from India to England. So, there are different forms of drain: remittances to England by Europeans for the support of families and education of children, a feature of the colonial system of government. Second is the remittances of savings by employees of the company, since most employees prefer to invest at home. Then the third form is the remittances for purchase of British goods for the consumption of British employees, as well as purchases by them of British goods in India. Then the fourth is government purchase of stores manufactured in Britain, and fifth is the interest charges on public debt held in Britain, excluding interest payments on railway loans and debts incurred for productive works. In addition, the government of India had to make huge payments to people in England on account of political, administrative and commercial connections established between India and England. These commitments were called home charges. So, what are those home charges? They included interest on public debt raised in England at comparatively higher rates, then annuities on account of railway and irrigation works, then payments in connection with civil departments where Englishmen were employed, and the fourth is India office expenses, including pensions to retired officials who had worked in India or who had worked for India in England and retired there, then pensions to army and naval personnel and their furlough allowances. Then we will discuss about the estimate of the drain. So, some idea of the extent of the drain can be got by figures quoted by some authors. Whereelst he estimated that, or Whereelst estimated that within a period of 5 years after the Battle of Plassey, goods and bullion worth 4.94 million pounds sterling went out of the country. The Britishers, they took away the gold, the silver, the jewelry, the precious stones in a large amount, and they took away the money also. So, I.C. Sinha stated that during second half of drain on Bengal's resources at was something like 38 million pounds. So, with the available information, it was calculated that 1/4 of all the revenues in India came to be annually remitted to England as home charges alone. So, there is considerable variation in these estimates because different authors adopted different methods for calculating the drain, and also because India's export surplus was undergoing continual change in the upward direction. So, nobody can give the accurate estimate of the drain of wealth during the British rule of India or during the colonial period. So, now I am going to discuss about the development of means of transport and communication system in ancient India. Up to the middle of the 19th century, the means of transport in India were backward. There is no all-weather roads were there, and there is no motor vehicles. The people were using bullock carts and pack horse for their transport and communication system. They were confined to bullock cart and pack horse. The British introduced steamships on the rivers and set about improving the roads. The Grand Trunk Road from Calcutta to Delhi, that was begun in 1839 and it was completed in the 1850s. This was the road which was constructed by the English East India Company for the convenience of their transport system. They could easily took away the raw materials to their country and they could easily reach the place where the people raised their voice against them. Then efforts were made to link by road the major cities, ports and markets of the country for their trading purpose. Then there was the development of railways. The earliest suggestion to build a railway in India was made in Madras in 1831. The wagons were to be drawn by horses. The construction of steam driven railways in India was first proposed in 1834 in England. In 1870, the all rail route between Kolkata and Mumbai started functioning. The total route in 1870 was 7,680 kilometer, which was 65,217 kilometer, out of which 10,523 kilometer went to Pakistan, leaving India with 54,694 kilometer. So, the British East India Company, they developed the means of communication and transport for their own benefit, for the better trading system, and they connected the roads with the ports and the main cities and main towns for the development of trade. So, in this chapter we will discuss more and more. In the next class I will discuss about the permanent land settlement system, Mahalwari system and the Rayatwari system, the revenue policies which were introduced by the Britishers for the collection of taxes for the better economic administration or economic system. So, in this class we have learned about the commercial policies, the free trade policy, then the different types of development of trade system, the communication and transport system, the drain of wealth theory. So, in the next class we will discuss about the revenue policies. So, now I will end here, that this chapter is very important from the economic point of view, because by studying this chapter we can know about the economic system which was prevalent during the period of English East India Company's rule. Okay, thank you very much.